Yeah.
Excellent. Alrighty, so I can't see anything, so I'm just going to roll through my presentation, and I can click back to Zoom when you want, when we get to Q&As. I'm going to suggest what we do is we view. What we do is if there's any questions, you guys just pipe right up and we'll roll through it. This presentation sort of comes in 3 chunks, which is Rotary's position on this. And then we talk about the actual science, mathematical modeling, and the challenges of climate action or climate change. And then we move on to things that clubs could consider doing to perhaps have an effect. So, did it jump to the next page?
Not yet.
Oh. Okay. Mine did, which is interesting. So I'm trying to figure out what's wrong here.
It's a long way between here and Canada. Those guys have to delay.
Let's try this. Okay, now it's working, right?
Yeah, there we go.
All right, so this is me. And that was my 60th birthday a few years ago that we had a big party at. And so, you know, being Canadian, we ski, we do a bunch of other things. Jumping forward on what matters. Here's the 3 things we're going to be talking about today. Promising initiatives is where we could spend a bit of time. The Rotary 4-way test. Well, you know, climate action, climate change, climate catastrophe, climate, whatever adjective you want to use, it affects the people who contributed the least to climate action or climate change are going to be most affected. And so from a Rotary perspective, where we have all these worldwide initiatives, is it fair to all concerned? Definitely not. Can good things that we're doing build goodwill and build better friendships? Sure. Will it be beneficial to all? Well, if we start talking about world effects, it's not great. So somebody's got a message on top of my arrow button. There we go. When Rotary is trying to deal with a tough issue, what has been happening is because of the politicization of climate action and climate change, we've gone, oh, it's political. And so Rotary's put a stake in the ground and said, it's not political. It relates to everything that we wish to do. And therefore, we're going to put a stake in the ground and say it's not political. Now, what's interesting is Rotary Worldwide has been focusing on polio for a very long time. And it's just really only in 2 areas in Pakistan and Afghanistan right now. And because of various things that are happening worldwide, we can't send MSF there. It's very difficult to get in. And so worldwide, Rotary is actually looking at whether or not to completely pivot away from polio to climate action. And this is SRAG, Environment Sustainability Rotary Action Group. So there's like 25 Rotary Action Groups, and environment and sustainability is one of them. And this is our founding statement for our position paper. We have a new area of focus policy. This was created over a 3 or 4 year period and put into form, I will say, a year ago. The big one is addressing the cause of climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and then strengthening ecosystems and communities affected by climate change. There's a bunch of other statements in there that we'll drill into a little bit, but this basically is the foundation of what we're doing. Now, parallel to all of this is the United Nations and the 17 goals that the United Nations have to try to affect change. And they're trying to put all of these in place in a material way by 2030. And there's a fair amount of parallel between the 17 goals of the United Nations and Rotary. So on the left there, promoting peace, fighting disease, those were the traditional 6 areas of focus of Rotary. And you see over on the right, those colorful blocks, those are the parallel United Nations areas of focus. And then frankly, environment and sustainability, or the 7th area of focus, I'll move my head, there it is the umbrella over top of the 6 areas of focus. So we call them 7 areas now. Just about a year ago, a year and 3 months ago, Rotary did declare officially on June 25th that we have a 7th area of focus. And they seeded it with $20 million worth of funding to deal with expenses, but also to have a fair bit go out in form of international grants. So when I wave $20 million as a potential carrot at organizations to consider whether or not they want to take on scalable projects that you could do locally, but have a worldwide scale, $20 million is a pretty good seed fund. Now, I'll dive into the politics a little bit. You know, the number one export that the United States has, in my opinion, is media. We are so affected by the discourse that occurs in everything from politics to climate action to who Britney Spears' dad is and what he's done. It just spills over into Canada in a huge way. Well, much like I remember my mother quitting smoking when my younger sister was born some, I don't know, 50 years ago. And back then there was a great amount of debate as to whether or not cigarette smoking was bad for you, because they had all these ads saying Dr. So-and-so prefers Camels or whatever. Well, we have the same problem right now. And we see this in Canada in a big way with our oil and gas industry. This is just in that 2003-2010 window of time, the amount of money that's being invested. And in the beginning, they were saying climate change isn't real. It doesn't happen. It's not real. Don't believe a thing. Well, climate action, climate change has become so real. Their change in their stories has been, oh, climate action is going to be so expensive, we shouldn't do it. So that's the theme that's happening now. Both of those are bullpucky. You may know Dr. Michael Mann. He co-won the Nobel Prize with Al Gore when Al Gore presented the hockey stick graph. Well, it was actually Dr. Michael Mann who invented in his research the hockey stick graph, where he analyzed what's going on and then what's happening. And he's, you know, as certain as anything. In fact, within the science world, it is a 100% certainty. And the only question is, how bad will it get in terms of climate change? This is as deep as I'm going to get into the math and science. There are whole courses on this, but an engineer, you trust engineers to design bridges or your buildings or whatever it is, it's the same math, the same level of math. But what I want to do is just walk through this. So we have about 1,360 watts of energy per meter squared that comes from the sun that hits 70,000 feet up. And bouncing off clouds and different things, we get about 240 watts that gets to the Earth's surface. And for the longest time, we had balance where we receive from the sun short, long, and medium wave energy from the sun. We radiate out only long wave energy off the planet. And carbon molecules have this most unique ability to absorb long wave energy. We've been increasing the density of carbon in our atmosphere. And the result is that in 2005, we were only 0.5 watts difference. So we were absorbing 0.5 watts per meter squared planet-wide. It has, by 2019, it's 1.5 watts per meter squared that we're absorbing planet-wide. And if you really want to get into it, here's the mathematical formula for the energy in, energy out. It's not a belief. It's not something that isn't science-based. It is mathematical in its basis. And if you guys want a course that goes deeper into this, I'll be glad to sort of lead you through that process. But the same math where we design what a steel beam can carry, or I don't know, send a spaceship to space, that same math we use for this. What if we had no CO2? Well, the sweet spot planet-wide is 15 degrees C. If we didn't have any greenhouse gases, then everything that entered radiated out, the planet would be minus 18 degrees C, or 0 Fahrenheit. If we were like Venus and we had too much, would be 400 degrees. How do we measure this? Well, the year I was born, Charles David Keeling started tracking this worldwide in Hawaii. And it was about 280 parts per million then. We hit a new high number on April 3rd this year of 421 parts per million. The safe number we consider is 350. And what's interesting is in July, the observation was 415, and I just looked today, it was 412. Why does it change? And you look at the curve here and you see go up, down, up, down. The general line is vertical or that way. But why does it change? It's because 70% of the Earth's mass or planetary mass, I'm trying to think of the right words here, non-ocean, so land mass, is above the equator. And so when summer hits, all the growth, all the plants start absorbing carbon, and then in winter, it releases it. And the southern hemisphere, with only 30% of our total land mass, doesn't equate what we have above the equator. And so the result is we have this line that goes up and down. Okay, what do we do before 1958? Well, we have ice core data going back quite a distance, 800,000 years. What do we do going back further and further? Well, we have proxy data that we found in fossils that are easy to analyze, that tell us over time, it's been 2,000 parts per million, and we've had glaciations and we've had everything, and we're able to track all that. Here's what's really cool. For the last 10,000 years, when civilization has modernized, it's been incredibly flat, 280 parts per million for 10,000 years. And during that period of time, mankind has flourished. Yeah, there's been tiny variations that we've had ice ages or semi-ice ages and warm periods, but essentially it's been flat compared to the past. These lines that are more or less vertical are the representative pathways based upon a series of assumptions along the way. This is what concerns me. If I go back, if you recall, we're 412 today, we were 421 in March. The last time the planet had a concentration of 300 to 400 was the mid-Pliocene, about 3 million years ago. Recently enough for the planet not to be terribly different. Temperatures were 2 to 3 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial norms, and 10 degrees in the Arctic and Antarctic. Sea levels were 15 to 25 meters higher. In the Canadian North, grasslands abounded, the Sahara was covered in vegetation, and the world was significantly different than it is now. Now I stop here at this point and go, my daughter-in-law said to me when I was walking her through this, because her dad is a hardcore climate isn't changing guy. She goes, how do I teach my dad this? And I go, and she got to this slide and she go, all right, why is it not 15 to 20 meters higher now? So I walked over to my freezer, pulled open the freezer drawer, which had an ice drawer in it. And I said, is it melted now? She goes, no. I said, would it be melted tomorrow? She goes, maybe. Would it be melted in a week? All the ice that's in the drawer? She goes, definitely. Never in the history of time have we been able to find a period of time where we've changed the composition of the carbon in the atmosphere by 50% in 150 years. It doesn't exist in the proxy data. So everything when we're looking forward is best guesses about how rapid the changes are going to be and when the feedback loops get kicked. That's the biggest unknown that we have in climate science right now. Is it 100 years? Is it 20 years? We don't know. We have some pretty good science indicating that, but we have no proxy data that we can look at because we've never changed the atmosphere. Nothing has ever changed it in 150 years. Canada sucks. Believe it or not, you guys are better than us. Your average carbon footprint per person. And so back to the carbon test that you guys were talking about, this is great. 20.4 tons per person per year is your current footprint. We're worse. And actually, it's no longer 23, it's now 26 tons of carbon. Canada is the only G7 nation in the world that has increased our carbon footprint per person and our total carbon emissions since the 2005 base data. The US is actually really good. You're down quite a bit. And that's because of a lot of initiatives I'm going to indicate. We're trying to pivot that quickly. Our problem is that we have a significant oil and gas industry. That's a significant contributor to our footprint. It's about a third of our footprint. This is Vancouver, but it could be Seattle. If 2 degrees happens, 13 meters is the sea level rise that the city of Vancouver is planning on happening. Oh, here's the airport. Here's Richmond. If you know Vancouver at all, half of Vancouver is going to be underwater. Think about a 13-meter seawall. Well, you guys had one Where did the most recent hurricane strike? Hurricane Ida.
In New Orleans.
New Orleans, thank you. You guys spent $26 billion building a seawall out there that worked, and it prevented massive flooding to happen. Unfortunately, your infrastructure wasn't hardened, so all the power lines and everything else blew over, but your seawall worked. Well, Vancouver's looking at the same thing. Try to imagine what a seawall that has to stop a 13-meter storm surge is going to need to cost. So what is this going to cost? So the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, estimates that if we limit it, it's going to cost about 2.5% of global GDP. Conversely, the bending the curve, I'm trying to lean the right way here, has an economic global benefit of 3 to 7 times greater than that. So that's happening worldwide right now in key locations where systemic changes are happening on a rapid basis. And I'm going to give you some examples of that in just a minute. So Biden in November announced, and he had 40 world leaders there to meet new climate action goals. And so he announced 50% drop to 52% by 2030, which meets the new IPCC Climate Action Plan. So on August 9th, the IPCC released their 6th report, and it has become far more hardened in terms of its knowledge and projections. If I go back to the first one, it was very vague in terms, this might happen. We have low confidence. Now most of the things are high confidence. Canada followed along with 40 to 45%. You know, I was teaching a high school group recently, and one of the girls said, you know, I've been told that if we all just go to vegetarianism, it'll solve it. So I pulled up this slide and I said, well, livestock and manure is 5.8%. So you can all become vegetarians and have some effect on this, but look at what energy is. Energy is the big monster. It's the big gorilla in the room. And so we have all of these sectors that we need to focus on, and they are happening at a slower or faster amount. But change, here's one of the cool things. Everybody has one of these things, right? A phone. Yeah. 16 years ago, these things didn't exist. 16 years ago, you had that big cement block with the antenna that you sometimes, people, if they had a phone like that, it'd be really cool. This is 13 years in the United States in New York City. And in 1901 or 1903, here is one horseless carriage, and the rest of them are horses. And here is 13 years later, and there's one horse and buggy, and all the rest are cars. That level of change is upon us right now. But let's switch. What's happening? United Arab Emirates, oil-producing nation. I don't know if you guys know what energy costs, but you know, it's fairly expensive per kilowatt hour. They did a deal for 1.35 cents per kilowatt hour for 60% of the energy that they're going to need to run their entire country. Now, they got a lot of desert, so it's pretty easy to do that. LA I called up 8 Minute Solar and said, how the heck did you do that? And they go, well, 1, huge projects, 2, we did it in Arizona, 3, cheap Mexican labor, and 4, the costs were so low in terms of the inputs that we were able to do a deal for 1.9 cents for energy for California, but this is for 20 million people of energy, and 1.3 cents for storage, for battery. Saudi Arabia did this and recently signed a deal in Saudi Arabia, right? They produce a lot of oil and gas for 1 cent per kilowatt hour. Now, I asked this question back to something I'm part of. I'm CEO of an energy company that's producing carbon neutral diesel and 2 bioaccelerants. When we chose where we were going to be, energy costs was one of the key considerations for us because we consume 3.1 megawatts of power in our production facility. And we chose a low cost energy environment. And we also chose an environment we could internally produce a fair bit of our own energy so we wouldn't have to pay for grid energy. If energy is virtually free in some countries and very expensive in others, you're going to go to the places where energy is very inexpensive. And that's one of the things we chose to do. But that's not enough. It's not enough. We can stop at 421 parts per million. If we could hit the brakes right now and stop there, it would not be good enough. We have so much momentum built into the system. We need to figure out how to draw down. And so a partner of Rotary International is Project Drawdown, which is a really useful thing for you guys to pay attention to. It has great information that you can use to help your club understand what to do. But specific to that, at an industrial level, somebody you might know, Bill Gates, might have heard of him. And in Canada, Murray Edwards, one of our richest guys, in Surrey, BC, built this direct air capture system. Now, there's a couple of other direct air capture systems being built worldwide. Their next one that was sold, and it's being built in Houston, in the Houston area right now. We need to pull this. And what they do is it's a ramjet air system that then condenses the air and through an electrochemical process, particulates out the carbon. Brilliant. And it works. And so they've done a second and third round of funding, which are all oil and gas companies. And they're building a massive one of these right now. The next one's being built in California. If we had 760 of these in Canada, we could declare ourselves as carbon neutral, which is interesting because it would give us a much longer runway to affect systemic changes. And so that's a possibility. Now, here just in this province, and you know, in the States, you guys do a huge amount of this. I mean, your scale of energy generation, green energy generation, dwarfs what we're doing in Canada, but we're catching up. And so just in this province, we've had a 1.3 billion in renewable energy investment in 2019. And the growth is 30-fold. There is nothing happening in the private sector anymore in traditional energy, which is a bit of a challenge because natural gas is our major heating source, and we have a real problem in that if I forward project 8 years, our natural gas is going to cost somewhere between $8 and $12 a gigajoule. And that's going to really affect some people who haven't been able to pivot. The same thing, because the majority of our natural gas gets exported to the States, there's going to be a shortage, and we need to move quickly towards green energy. Industry shifts. So Manulife targets 80% reduction. The bank we're using in our project, Van City, wants to have 90% of its portfolio to be carbon neutral. Now, here's a cool thing. Canada's oil sands have declared an alliance with the Paris Accord, and they will be carbon neutral by 2050. And they've all mapped out their pathway to be there. When you're the high cost end of the pipeline, high carbon product, and the world is changing, you've got a problem. Well, our oil sands are that. High cost, high carbon end of the pipeline. So they need to get to carbon neutral, and they're investing billions of dollars on that right now. And then the world's largest asset manager put climate at the center of its investment strategy. And they did that about 18 months ago. And the change was amazing. And they're basically not investing in anything. So the only way you can have a high carbon project built these days is to have government build it. Wind and solar are cheaper. So the Lazard reports is a regular analysis of what is the cost of energy. And so industrial scale solar and industrial scale wind are now the cheapest energies on the North American grid anywhere and everywhere. That combined with battery are now producing the results we want, where the other ones are now the surge protectors. So that is peaker plants from coal, peaker plants from natural gas, or other forms of energy. I was at a conference in Philadelphia of the World Sport Alliance just before COVID hit. And there was this great debate about whether or not carbon tax works. And I was luckily able to throw a slide up. They let me have this, and I threw a slide up. And I want to walk you guys through this. So this is the province of British Columbia, which in Canada has had a carbon tax for the longest of all of our provinces, basically since 1990. And the big thing they've done, which is amazing, is they've reduced the greenhouse gas emissions per unit of GDP in half in this 20-year period, almost 30-year period, while leading Canada in GDP growth. They've halved their GHG footprint while leading Canada. So the argument that a carbon tax is a job-killing, economy-killing tax has been proven wrong. What it has encouraged is people like Murray Edwards and Bill Gates to invest in BC projects like this. That's a $500 million project, as they did all the R&D on that. So back to the great debate. If you have an opportunity to influence anybody, you can use BC as an example, have their GHG footprint relative to their GDP while leading Canada in economic growth. Now, here's something very cool. Traditionally, geothermal, the parasitic load to pump from 3 or 4 kilometers down to the surface, the math didn't work. And so you could only have geothermal working in areas where there was a lot of energy close to the surface. Think Iceland as a good example. These guys figured it out. These are Calgary-based drilling companies. They got their seed investment after this, just after they figured this out, was 40 million from BP. They are they're building these things in Europe where the cost of energy is very high right now. Basically what they figured out is a suction thermal loop, where when the hot water, hot liquid comes to the surface, they use a refrigerator-like device, pull all the energy out of it, and it densifies. It's more dense than the liquid that's coming up. And so just through gravity and density, they create this thermal loop without pumps required at all. This can be built everywhere and anywhere. Now, right now, the cost of drilling forces it to be $125 per megawatt or 12.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Doesn't work in this province. Our energy is cheaper. It does when you add carbon tax on top of that. So I help these guys calculate the carbon tax contribution to the revenue stack, and now they're building these things everywhere. I'm also helping food, water, wellness. This particular young lady is brilliant, and she lectures in the New York Climate Week. She's figured out a way of scientifically quantifying the carbon density in soil. So if we look at the Great Plains, that is from California to the Great Lakes, and in Canada, BC and the Rocky Mountains, right to our Great Lakes, the carbon density of the soil back when the buffalo roamed was about 13–14%. And through modern agricultural purposes, we've taken it to close to zero. Our agricultural practices these days are the equivalent of driving through the drive-through 4 times a year. You turn over the soil, you get rid of all the carbon, then you use a weed killer, and then you add your seed, and then you add your fertilizer, and then you add your weed killer, and then you remove your crop. There's nothing which encourages deep carbon or roots. She's figured out a way of quantifying it. She did 8,000 test pits, 1 meter deep, and then she's having a change of practice happening with a whole bunch of farmers, and going back and then measuring the carbon density in the soil. Now, the cool thing is, if Canada's 729 megatons, we can get 100 tons per acre. And so if I just look at Alberta alone, we can take Canada well past carbon neutrality. And that's happening in some farms. I'm going to skip because we're running out of time. Carbon Action Tracker, I'll send some stuff. Aaron, I see you there giving me the look. Now, I sent a note out to Dan this morning. We have 13 regional climate action groups. Big West would be ours. I suggest you join it. They have regular meetings, they have presentations, there's newsletters that come out, and that's going to help you understand a little bit more on your learning pathway of what different clubs could do. Aaron, do I have a few more minutes, or should I bail at this point?
So we typically end around 1:15, so we're a couple minutes over, so
right.
Probably wrap up you.
I'm going to wrap up. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up at this point and stop at SRAG. Costs you $30 to join, or if your club joins, it costs $100. I suggest you consider doing that. And now I'm open to Q&As.
All right. Anyone in the room have any questions? Yes, Peter.
What's done with the CO2 when it's removed in that DAC?
Direct air capture? Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. It's in particles. And so there's a couple different things. Some of the original companies that invested are SAG-D oil and gas projects, and it costs them more than $100 a ton to purchase carbon dioxide. So they re-vaporize it and inject it into the ground. Now, that's not great. They pull it back out. We're also looking at carbon densification in soil, either through acceleration using biochar and carbon pellets, or sequestering it in other ways. But right now, the initial stage investors are to replace manufactured carbon dioxide in SAG-D projects. It's not the best outcome because you're still getting oil and gas out of the ground, but that is what's happening today.
All right. Well, thank you, Joey, so much for being with us today and for keeping these things top of mind for us. Obviously, the environment is important to Rotary and to all of us as humans living on the earth. So we appreciate you being here and talking with us. We do make a donation on behalf of all of our speakers to the Polio Plus fund for Rotary International, and we'll do that in your honor as well. Dan, do you want to give a quick update on who our speaker next week will be?
I'm gonna hang on a sec real quick. Let me pull it up.
And while you're doing that, Dan, Joey, I don't know if you saw, but
Yeah.
Joe was asking if you share your contact info.
Dan, the best way to do that is with the newsletter that I just sent you.
Yep.
If you
I'll do
send
that.
that out with my contact information attached to that, then I can respond to anybody.
Yep. Perfect. We'll do that. Tracy Golf, director of the Horizons High School, will be presenting on the new Horizon facility and its impact on furthering their mission. And so, got any questions on that? See Jackie, that's her contact. So.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to that next week. Thanks everyone for joining us by Zoom or in person. We are adjourned.
Thanks, Joey. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.